Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
6 years ago, I was married to a man who treated me like nothing more than a baby-making machine. He was great with our kids, I'll give him that, but as a husband, absolutely terrible. Every day was filled with put-downs and being made to feel worthless. Once he got his precious heirs, things got even worse. Finally, I found the courage to leave. I walked away with practically nothing, just my clothes, an old car worth maybe $4,000, and a computer. That's it. I crashed at my girlfriend's place for a couple of weeks while I scrambled to find somewhere to live. The best I could manage was a run-down townhouse with roommates. My bed was literally a couch someone was throwing away that reeked of cat pee. Those first months were brutal. I worked 3 or 4 jobs just to survive, with one being full-time. Some weeks I couldn't even sleep between shifts, staying awake for almost 48 hours straight. But I was determined to build something better for myself and my kids. Fast forward 1 year, my divorce was finalized, and I'd managed to transform that crappy townhouse into an actual home. I bought furniture piece by piece, set up a proper bedroom for when my kids visited. I was proud of what I'd accomplished through sheer willpower and endless work. The landlord, who I'll just call the scumbag landlord, seemed decent enough at first. I was never late with rent, kept the place clean, followed all the rules. But he had this creepy habit of showing up constantly with made-up excuses about needing to check the plumbing or test something. Really, he just wanted to hang around and make uncomfortable small talk that always had these inappropriate undertones. It made my skin crawl. When my lease ended, I switched to month because I'd found an amazing house in the mountains nearby. Finally, I could afford something better than slum living. According to my lease, I had to give 1 month's notice to move out. Problem was, I could only get the new house starting in 3 weeks. I sent the scumbag landlord an email explaining that I needed to move out in 3 weeks instead of 4. I told him I understood this was short notice, so if he couldn't find a replacement tenant, I'd still pay next month's rent, as required by the lease. Within 1 week, he responded saying my offer was very generous, but he'd already found new tenants starting next month. He said I was off the hook for the extra rent and mentioned he'd even collected their deposit already. Perfect, or so I thought. 2 days later, disaster struck through no fault of ours. The townhouse came with all appliances, including a washer and dryer on the main floor. My roommate threw in a load of laundry and went to take a nap. He woke up to find the kitchen and living room flooded with an inch of water. The washer had malfunctioned, and its sensor switch never told it to stop filling. My roommate called me in a panic, telling me I needed to get home right away because the place was completely flooded. I raced home from work to find water everywhere. We called the scumbag landlord, immediately explaining that the washer had malfunctioned and flooded the main floor with water damage throughout the kitchen and living room. By the time he arrived, my roommate and I had already removed most of the standing water with help from friends who brought shop vacuums. Surprisingly, the scumbag landlord didn't seem too upset. An appliance repair guy came out to examine the washer. The repair guy pointed out the problem, explaining that the dial stuck on the fill cycle and wouldn't advance to agitation. He replaced the dial and lubricated the mechanism, then left. The next week was chaos with insurance adjusters, workers ripping out carpet, and cutting 2 feet worth of the lower drywall from the entire main level. On moving day, even though I still had a couple days left on my lease, the scumbag landlord let himself in while movers were loading my stuff. He walked around taking pictures of everything. I honestly thought it was for insurance purposes. Feeling guilty about the flood damage, I approached him and told him I wouldn't ask for any of my deposit back given what happened with the flood. He thanked me and said that was very generous of me. My roommate and the moving crew heard this exchange. I thought we were done. 2 weeks into my beautiful new mountain home, the scumbag landlord showed up at my door with papers in hand. He told me I was being sued and handed me a manila envelope containing 18 pages of itemized charges, complete with photos from his little documentation session. He was nickel and diming me for everything imaginable. A bent Venetian blind that was already damaged when I moved in, scuff marks on walls, normal wear and tear stuff, but then he wanted me to pay his insurance deductible and the following month's rent. His excuse was that the new tenants supposedly backed out at the last minute, claiming the place wouldn't be ready with all the repairs. He was also charging me for building improvements that were never my responsibility. Cracks in the living room wall from the building settling, new lighting fixtures, updated faucets, all because he claimed I was somehow negligent. This was clearly his standard operating procedure with tenants. Most of them were on welfare and probably didn't know how to fight back. But I wasn't most tenants. I'd just escaped a marriage that destroyed my self-esteem, and I'd spent a year rebuilding my confidence and dignity. No way was I letting this bully steamroll me. I had 10 days before the arbitration hearing. Time to get to work. First, I tracked down the appliance repair guy and got a signed statement. He confirmed that the washer desperately needed maintenance and that he hadn't done any work for the scumbag landlord in almost 5 years. I researched local rental laws and discovered landlords are required to maintain appliances annually. Next, I talked to other tenants and learned this wasn't his first rodeo. He'd sued multiple tenants after they moved out. Most didn't know how to defend themselves and lost by default when they failed to show up. I hunted them down and got sworn statements about his pattern of behavior. I prepared a point-by-point rebuttal to every single charge, including photos from my year plus of living there. I printed all our email correspondence and convinced my former roommate and one of the movers who witnessed our conversation about the deposit to testify. Arbitration day arrived. I put on my power suit and walked into that courthouse conference room with my witnesses in tow. In Canada, arbitration happens in front of a real judge, just in a conference room instead of a courtroom. The scumbag landlord went first since he was the plaintiff. He spent over 40 minutes presenting his case while I sat quietly and took notes. When he finished, I stood up and handed out copies of my rebuttal to everyone present. I methodically addressed every single point he'd raised. The scumbag landlord couldn't contain himself, interrupting me every other sentence. I paused each time he started talking and sweetly told him I'd remain quiet and respectful during his presentation and hoped he'd extend me the same courtesy. When I got to the appliance maintenance records and relevant sections of the tenant protection laws, he turned red. Then I dropped my counterclaim saying that not only should these charges be dismissed, but I wanted my full deposit, returned plus compensation for the day of work I was missing to be here. The judge's response is burned into my memory forever. He said he was very impressed with my presentation and that I clearly understood the law and my rights. From the photos and evidence presented, he noted it was obvious I took pride in maintaining a clean, well-furnished home and was a person of good character. Bottom line, not only did I win, but the scumbag landlord had to pay me back over 80% of my deposit plus interest. The judge added that they'd also be reviewing all of his previous arbitration filings, and if there was evidence of tenant harassment, he'd be reported to the Landlord Licensing Board. I walked out of there feeling on top of the world, but I wasn't done. Knowing this guy had a history of preying on vulnerable tenants, I printed copies of the final judgment and distributed them to every tenant in his complex. I wanted them to know his tactics and encouraged them to document everything and keep photos to protect themselves. The scumbag landlord now owed me money, but he ignored my requests for payment. The deadline came and went with no response, so I looked up his home address through public records and paid him a visit. I knocked on his door, but he wouldn't answer even though I could tell he was home. After a few more knocks and doorbell rings, he turned on his house alarm, which startled me at first but quickly became hilarious. What kind of tough guy hides behind his alarm system? I yelled loud enough for him to hear that I wasn't going anywhere until I got my money. He shouted back from inside telling me to get off his property or he'd call the police. I told him no problem and stepped off his property onto the public sidewalk. I set up camp with a folding chair, cooler full of drinks, sandwiches, and all my legal paperwork. I was ready to stay as long as it took. When neighbors gathered due to the alarm commotion, I politely explained the situation. I told them I was a former tenant who was wrongfully sued, that I'd won my case, and now he legally owed me money, but refused to pay. I showed anyone interested the court-signed documents proving my claims. Everything I said was true and backed up by official paperwork. The police arrived within 1 hour. They spoke to the scumbag landlord first while he ranted about harassment and slander. Then they came to talk to me. The officer told me I wasn't doing anything wrong since I was on public property, wasn't disturbing the peace, and it wasn't slander if it was true. The scumbag landlord came out screaming at the officers and me while I sat quietly in my chair. I explained to them that I'd happily leave once I received the money he was legally required to pay me by that day's deadline. Until then, I was perfectly comfortable there telling anyone who'd listen why I was camping out. After 1 hour of him yelling on his front lawn like a lunatic, his wife finally emerged with money in hand. She gave it to the police, who verified the amount and handed it to me. They documented that the final payment was complete. I thanked the officers for their professionalism, packed up my camping gear, and went home with my money and my dignity intact. On this day, I decided to get my usual burger and fries and spend my remaining break time playing shuffleboard alone. It's relaxing trying to get those pucks positioned right. I was dressed in my work clothes, a pressed shirt and khakis, since I had a district meeting that afternoon. When I was eating and playing, I noticed the pub was getting hit hard with a lunch rush. Tables were filling up fast and I could see my friend behind the bar getting overwhelmed. She was the only person working the floor, trying to mix drinks, take orders, and handle payments all at once. The dining room was packed, but nobody was available to help serve the food sitting under the heat lamps. I believe in helping out when I can, especially when I see someone I know struggling. I walked over to the bar and asked if she needed help running some orders out to tables. She looked relieved and pointed to a tray loaded with plates. She told me those plates needed to go to the corner table and thanked me for offering to help. I grabbed the tray and headed over to deliver the food. The table had 4 people, and they looked like they had been waiting a while based on their expressions. When I set down their plates, one woman at the table caught my eye. She had that haircut that screams trouble, the kind where they ask for the manager before they've even sat down. Karen complained loudly that she had never seen it take so long just to get a sandwich. I said sorry for the wait and explained that the bartender had been really busy handling everything by herself today. I pointed toward my friend, who was still trying to keep up with orders. Karen snapped back that she could see how busy it was, but that I had just been sitting at the shuffleboard table eating my burger while letting the bartender drown. She demanded to know what kind of manager I was. I realized she had seen me playing earlier and thought I worked there because of how I was dressed. It was an honest mistake. I tried to explain that I didn't work there and was just trying to help because the bartender was swamped. Karen cut me off and accused me of lying to get out of trouble. She said she had heard enough and was calling the owner right then to let him know what a jerk I was. She was already pulling out her phone, ignoring anything I was trying to say. Every time I tried to explain the situation, she would just flip me off and wave me away. I could see this was going nowhere, so I decided to head back to the bar and let my friend know what was happening. I told the bartender that the woman in the corner thought I worked there and was calling her boss to complain about me. The bartender sighed and explained that the woman was a problem customer who came in every other day looking for things to complain about. She had somehow gotten the owner's phone number and threatened to call him when she didn't get her way. The owner usually just told the staff to give her a free meal and get her out of there. That raised red flags for me. In my years of management experience, I learned that rewarding bad behavior only encourages more of it. Giving problem customers free stuff just trains them to cause problems every time they want something for nothing. I went back to my shuffleboard game hoping the situation would blow over. About 10 minutes later, I saw Karen walking toward me with a smug expression on her face. She told me that she had informed the owner I was sitting there playing shuffleboard instead of helping my employee. She said he was on his way to fire me. I had enough of her attitude at this point. I told her that was going to be really hard for him to do since I didn't work there and called her a stupid witch. Her face went bright red, and before I knew what was happening, she reached over and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the pub, and conversation stopped as people turned to look. Karen screamed about how I dared to say that to her and threatened to screw up my whole life, calling me waste of filth. Now, I was raised to never hit a woman, but I was also raised not to let anyone put their hands on me. My years of martial arts training had taught me there are ways to handle situations like this without throwing punches. I hold a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo and a first degree in Hapkido, so I knew exactly how to control the situation. When she swung at me again, I caught her wrist and pulled her arm behind her back while sweeping her legs out from under her. She dropped to her knees in a restrained hold that would cause serious pain if she tried to move or struggle. It's a technique I have practiced hundreds of times, and it worked perfectly. The entire pub was staring now as Karen found herself completely immobilized on the floor. The bartender rushed over and asked if I was okay and what had happened. Karen yelled for me to let her go and threatened to get me arrested. She said she would sue me so hard I'd be lucky to be living in a cardboard box. I asked my friend if she had any zip ties back there because I needed to make sure Karen didn't try to hit anyone else. My friend brought me some zip ties from the kitchen, and I made makeshift restraints to keep Karen secure until the authorities could arrive. She was screaming threats the whole time, but she wasn't going anywhere. Right about then, the owner walked through the front door and took in the scene. He demanded to know what had happened. Karen immediately accused his manager of assaulting her and threatened to sue him, me, and the entire business. The owner looked confused and told her that I didn't work for him. He explained that I was just a regular customer who came in for lunch. For the first time since this whole thing started, Karen went quiet. I could see the realization on her face that she had made a serious mistake. The police arrived a few minutes later and I explained everything that had happened. My friend backed up my story, and several other customers who had witnessed the incident supported us. Karen tried to claim I had attacked her without reason, but the security cameras told the real story. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges for assault, and I told him absolutely. I explained that she had hit me first and I was just defending myself. I've always been clumsy, but our elementary school graduation ceremony took things to a new level. In my country, there's this tradition where all the kids who just finished elementary school jump into the town fountain to celebrate. It's supposed to be this fun, carefree moment that marks the end of childhood and the beginning of something new. Well, I managed to turn that joyful tradition into a disaster. When everyone else was laughing and splashing around in the fountain, I slipped on the wet stone edge and went down hard. My leg scraped against the rough concrete rim, and when I looked down I could see blood already seeping through my sock. The pain was instant and sharp, like someone had dragged a knife across my shin. My friends helped me out of the fountain, but the damage was done. What should have been a celebration turned into me limping home with a throbbing leg and a sock that was getting redder by the minute. The next few days were miserable. Every step sent shooting pains up my leg, and I spent most of my time sitting or lying down trying to keep weight of the injured area. That brings me to the bus situation. Public transportation in my country is rough on a good day. The drivers seem to think they're racing in some kind of competition, taking corners like they're trying to break land speed records. The buses themselves are ancient, rattling pieces of metal that shake and bounce over every pothole. On a normal day, standing while riding these buses is uncomfortable. With an injured leg, it would be torture. 3 days after the fountain incident, I needed to visit my friend who lived in the suburbs. My leg was still painful, but I figured I could manage the bus ride if I could get a seat. When I boarded, the bus was nearly empty, which felt like a small miracle. I chose a seat that wasn't designated for elderly or disabled passengers, but it had decent leg room where I could stretch out my injured leg without it getting constantly bumped. For the first 20 minutes, everything was fine. I sat there with my leg extended slightly, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. The bus driver was living up to his reputation, taking turns fast enough to make my stomach lurch, but at least I was sitting down. Then we hit the busy part of the route, and people started flooding onto the bus. At one stop, this woman climbed aboard and immediately started scanning the seats with the predatory look of someone hunting for prey. She was probably in her 50s with that expression that screamed entitlement. She spotted me almost immediately, probably because I was the youngest person in sight. She walked up to me and started lecturing me about how young people never give up their seats for older ones. Her tone was accusatory and demanding, like I was personally responsible for every rude teenager she'd ever encountered. I looked up at her confused because there were other seats available, just not the exact one she apparently wanted. I explained to her that I would normally give up my seat, but I had injured my leg. Her face twisted into this ugly sneer, like I just told her the most obvious lie in the world. She raised her voice and told me to get up immediately or she would force me to move. The way she said it made my blood boil. I tried to explain again that I wasn't lying and that my leg really hurt. I told her it was painful even when I was sitting, and standing would make it much worse. Instead of backing down or finding another seat, she actually reached for my arm and tried to physically pull me up. I weigh about 75 kilograms, which is more than I look like I weigh, so her tugging didn't accomplish much except making my leg throb worse. Then she demanded that I prove my injury was real. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. I asked her what exactly she wanted me to prove. She confirmed that, yes, she wanted proof that I was actually injured. The entire bus had gone quiet except for one woman who was still talking loudly on her phone, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. Everyone else was watching us, some looking uncomfortable, others seeming curious about how this would play out. I told her okay, if she wanted proof, she would get it. I decided to give her exactly what she asked for. If she wanted proof, she was going to get it in the most graphic way possible. I bent down and started untying my shoe, which immediately sent pain shooting up my leg. The movement pulled at the injury, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. Pulling off the sock was agony. The fabric had stuck to parts of the wound, and when I yanked it off quickly, it tore away the scab that had been trying to form. Fresh blood immediately started flowing down my leg. The silence on the bus became deafening. Even the woman on the phone seemed to pause her conversation. Karen's face went from smug satisfaction to horrified shock when she stared at my bloody, torn-up leg. I asked her sarcastically if she was enjoying the view of my injured foot. I kept my voice level, but inside I was furious. This woman had forced me to reopen a healing wound just to satisfy her need to prove I was lying. The pain was excruciating, but seeing the look on her face made it almost worth it. Karen didn't say another word. At the very next stop, she got off the bus. I have no idea if it was actually her stop or if she just couldn't handle the embarrassment of what she'd caused. Either way, I was glad to see her go. The other passengers kept sneaking looks at me, but I wasn't in the mood for questions or sympathy. I told anyone who looked like they might say something that I didn't want to talk about what happened. Then I put my headphones on and tried to ignore the throbbing in my leg while I waited for my stop. When I finally got off the bus, I felt like a zombie shuffling down the street. Each step was painful, and I could feel my sock getting wetter with blood. But there was something satisfying about the whole situation. That entitled woman had demanded proof, and when she got it, she couldn't handle the reality of what she'd forced me to do. By the time I reached my friend's place, my sock was completely soaked through with blood again. My friend took one look at my leg and helped me clean and rebandage it properly. The injury wasn't actually as serious as it looked that day, and I made a full recovery within 2 weeks. But that first week was genuinely painful. And what happened on the bus occurred just one day after the fountain incident, when everything was still raw and tender. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.